Okay, so this is quiz day. We are getting super close to the end of the chapter. Again, this is probably the most toughest part of it all because they're going to keep giving you guys equations in the standard form or in what we call the standard form of conics, and they're going to want you to be writing them into standard form for that specific type of conic. So just be prepared for that. That is on the test as well. I'm sure you'll see it in your final exam as well. So let's get started for the day. This first problem says, which conic section is represented by the following equation? Well, so I want to figure out what type of conic this is, and there's two different ways. So if my b is equal to 0, then that means I have no xy term. And if that's the case, then we want to use our a and our c value. If b does not equal 0, then that means we have some bxy term, whatever that value is, but there's some xy term in there. And if that's the case, then we use b squared minus 4ac. So there's two different scenarios. In this case, there is no xy term. There's no xy term. So we're going to look at our a value and our c value. A goes with the x squared, c goes with the y squared. Always the case. So when I look here, I have a is equal to 9. C is equal to -3. So when I multiply my A, C together, that's going to be -27. That is less than 0. If it's less than 0, then it's a hyperbola. If it's equal to 0, so remember the different cases. If it's equal to 0, so if it's equal to 0, that means that A was either 0 or C was 0, then it's a parabola. If it's greater than 0, it's an ellipse. And if A is equal to C, they're the same value, then it's going to be a circle. So these are your 4 scenarios. And again, you have your 3 scenarios if it's going to be when our B value is not equal to 0. So when you have an xy term and you want to use your b squared minus 4ac, it's called the discriminant, then you're going to have these 3 options. All righty. So my next one says, which equation represents an ellipse? So we're looking for an ellipse here. So again, there's 2 different scenarios, these same 2 scenarios. So if we're talking about an ellipse, then when I have A times C, then it's going to be greater than 0. My A times C is going to be greater than 0 if I'm looking at this case. Or if I'm using my b squared minus 4ac, if I'm looking for an ellipse, then it's going to be less than 0. It's less than 0. So again, I'm just looking at my table of information. If I'm looking for an ellipse, it's less than 0. Different than if I'm looking for an ellipse up here, we're talking about greater than 0. So notice the differences. It does depend on which scenario you're looking at. So I go here and I look at my different equations and I need to figure out, am I using my A, my C, or my b squared minus 4ac? So this first one, it has an xy term. So that means I need to use my b squared minus 4ac because it has an xy term. So this is my A, my B, and my C. So I'm going to have -4 squared minus 4 times 2 times 2, and that's going to give me 16 minus 4 times 2 is 8 times 2 is 16, so that's going to give me a value of 0. That is not less than 0. This doesn't say less than or equal to, so that is not going to be correct. That is not an example of an ellipse. I'm looking for it to be less than. Go to the next one. Again, it has an xy term, so you're going to be using your b squared minus 4ac. So here's my A, B, and that 1 is my C value. So I look here and I go, okay, I have -6 squared minus 4 times 2 times 1. -6 squared is 36. -4 times 2 is -8. Times 1 is still going to be -8, which is going to give me 28. 28 is greater than 0. We want less than 0 for this case, so that is not going to be my answer. I go to my next one. I have my xy here, so I'm using my b squared minus 4ac. So here's my A, B, and C. So I have 7 squared minus 4 times 3 times 8. 7 squared is going to be 49. -4 times 3 is a -12, times 8 is a -96. So it's going to leave me with -47 is less than 0. Ooh, this is going to be true. So this is correct. -47 is less than 0. My b squared minus 4ac is less than 0. It matches. This is an example of an ellipse. And then, of course, let's look at our last one. If I look here, there is no xy term. So I'd be using my a and my c value. So here's my a, here's my c. And if I look here, a is equal to 9, c is also equal to 9. You need to be careful because sometimes you guys just want to multiply them together and you see that it's positive and you think it's an ellipse, which a circle or an ellipse can be a circle. So be careful, but a circle is not necessarily an ellipse. See how it goes the one way, not the other. So in this case, yes, this is going to be specifically a circle because they're equal, but if I just multiplied them, you guys might think, oh, it's an ellipse. And that's not the case. So be careful. It's only going to be this third one down. So this is an example of a circle because A is equal to C. My next one. Alrighty. So this one says to write this equation in standard form. So I should be able to tell from here, from my answer options, that it's going to be an ellipse because it's a plus in between. And then I have two equations that are set equal to 0. Remember, standard form of ellipse has to be set equal to 1. So it cannot be either one of these because they're set equal to 0. But we should know it should be set equal to a value of 1. Now I need to figure out which one of these two is going to be correct. So let's go ahead and write it into its standard form of an ellipse. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to group my x's together. I'm going to group my y's together, and I'm going to move that constant, my real number, to the right side. So when I do that, I end up with 4x squared plus 24x plus blank. And then it's going to be plus, it's a 9y squared minus 36y plus my blank is equal to -36 plus my blank, right? All right, so need to be careful because what do both of these have? They both have a coefficient other than 1. So I need to make sure I factor out that value. I cannot complete the square if I have a coefficient other than 1. So I must factor those values out. I'm going to factor out my 4, and I'm left with x squared plus 6x plus blank, plus I'm going to factor out my 9, and I'm left with y squared minus 4y plus my blank is equal to -36 plus blank. But remember, whatever I factor out here is being multiplied to this term, so I need to keep my equation balanced. So it's going to be 4 times whatever I'm multiplying this by. This is going to be 9 times whatever this blank is. So in this case, it's 9 times whatever that blank is. I have to make sure that I include these values, these multiplication pieces, these coefficients out in front here on the left side onto my right side as well to keep it balanced. Now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to complete the square. Hopefully you guys have the pattern down. I take my 6, I cut it in half, that gives me 3. 3 squared is 9, that's what goes into my blank, which means that goes into this blank here. I take my -4, it's not just 4, half of it is -2. -2 squared is 4, so that's what I'm going to plug into my blank here, and that's what goes in my blank here. So when I write these as perfect squares, it's going to be 4 times what's being squared here is what goes to be squared here. So it's a +3, plus it's going to be 9. This is going to be y. This is a -2 that's being squared, so it's -2 squared is equal to, this is -36. This is going to be +36 plus another 36. So these two are going to cancel each other out, and it leaves me with the value of 36. This is not standard form because it has to be set equal to 1. It has to be set equal to 1. So I want to go ahead, I'm going to divide everything by 36. And when I do that, 4 goes into 36, 9 times 9 goes into 36, 4 times, and here's my value of 1. So my final solution is going to be x plus 3 squared all over 9 plus my y minus 2 squared all over 4 is equal to 1. And I pretty much had to work this one all the way out because the only differences between these two was going to be where the 9 and 4 were. And I could see that it matches up to my very first one here. So this is my correct answer. If one of these was a positive 2 and a negative 2, then that would have helped you right away. You could have identified that as soon as you completed the square, but that was not the case. So depending on where the differences are, it's going to depend on where you need to work do your work through. Questions. Hopefully you guys are getting more comfortable with this completing the square. So these are going to be types of hyperbolas because they're all minus. All my answers are minus, so I know it's going to be a hyperbola. These are the ones you need to be careful about because of that negative. So again, when I do these ones, I'm going to group my x's together. Same pattern every time I'm doing all of these. I'm going to group my y's together, and then my constant's going to go to the right side. So I end up with 25x squared plus 200x plus my blank. Now I always do plus, and then this is going to be minus my 9y squared plus 18y plus my blank is equal to negative 166 plus my blank. Kind of running out of room there. So it's a negative 166. Notice I put the negative inside the parentheses. I didn't just do a minus because I need to factor out that negative 9 so that it's also applied to this y value. Otherwise, you'll get the wrong answer. If you just do negative 9y squared plus your 18y plus your blank, this is going to be the wrong sign. So you cannot do that. That will be the wrong sign. So again, you need to make sure you factor out your coefficient because it's other than 1. It's something other than 1. So if this was just a negative y squared and there was no 9, I would just factor out a negative 1. So I'd pull out the negative from both of them as a negative 1 value. So that could happen. So when I factor out my 25 from this first one, I'm left with x squared plus 8x plus my blank. I'm going to factor out a negative 9. So that leaves me with y squared minus 2y plus my blank is equal to negative 166 plus my blank. So remember, this is going to have my 25 here times something. This is going to have my negative 9 here times my something. So again, look at how when I do this, this would have been a positive, but it should be a negative value. So this is not correct to just write it as a negative. You need to factor out a negative 9. I go ahead and I start my completing the square. Half of 8 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So 16 is what I'm going to write in my blanks. Here it's half of negative 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1. So it's going to be value of 1. Notice that this term here is always going to be a positive and it's always going to be a perfect square because it's always that squared term that's going in there. Now I could go ahead and I can write it as a perfect square. So it's going to be x, and whatever's being squared goes into this piece of what's being squared. Minus 9, this is going to be a y. Negative 1's being squared, so minus 1 squared is equal to, this is negative 166, plus this is 400 minus 9. So when I go ahead and I add all that up, I get 225. Of course, we need it equal to 1, so I'm going to divide everything by 225. So it's going to give me a value of 1. 9 goes into 225 25 times. 25 goes into 225 9 times. So my final answer is going to look like this. It's going to be x plus 4 squared all over 9 minus y minus 1 squared all over 25 is equal to 1. This is my final answer. And it's going to be this one right here. Now you could have crossed off as soon as you got to completing the square, you should have known it wasn't going to be this one or this one. And then you could look here and you could even see this one, doesn't match up. They're not the same from this piece right here. So you could have actually just stopped when you got to this and looking at where your center would be. But if you want to make sure you did it all correctly and that it matches, I would continue it all the way through. Questions? Am I going too fast? All right. My last one here. This one says that here's your graph. What is the focus? Okay, well, here's my graph. I don't know what this looks like. How do I graph this? I don't know where my vertex is going to be because it's not in standard form of a parabola. But that's okay because we could go ahead and we could write it in standard form. So remember we talked about standard form of parabola. This has my y squared. So it's going to be some, I'm trying to remember what form that they gave to you. I think they gave it to you as y minus my k squared is equal to, did they write it as your x plus, I don't know how they wrote your constant. I don't know if they used the variable like b, whatever that constant is, something like that. Or they gave it to you as 4p x minus h. That's another way that they gave it to you. So we've worked with that p-value a lot, so we'll go with this route. So either way, there's so many different ways to do the standard form. There's some slight variations depending on textbook to textbook. So for this one, we use that 4p a lot because that p-value helps us count where we're at, right? So let's go ahead and use this, especially because we're looking for the focus and not just the vertex value. So if I look here, I know that my y has to be written as a perfect square because that's where we have the square. But when I look here, I have a y and an 8y. That's not a perfect square. So just like we were doing above, we need to take that and write it as a perfect square. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to notice how the square is by itself. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move both these terms to the right side. So I end up with y squared minus plus 8y plus some blank, because remember, we want to write this as a perfect square. We want to get it to look something like this, is equal to, I'm going to add 4x, I'm going to add 24. So 4x plus 24. You with me on that? All right. So I go, all right, well, sweet. There's no coefficient here, so I don't have to worry about factoring out. It's just the value of 1. So I could jump right in. I do my 8. Half of 8 is 4. 4 squared is going to be 16, and this is going to be 16. But remember, what I add to one side, I have to add to the other. So if I add 16 here, I still have to add my 16 here. I always have to keep it balanced. What I add to the left side, I have to add to the right side. So I can write this now as a perfect square, and it's going to be y. This is a positive 4, so plus 4 squared is equal to 4x. I have 24 plus 16 is 40. I'm almost where I need to be, but I want it to be in this format. So notice this x doesn't have a coefficient. It's just a value of 1. So I want this so that this x is a value of 1. And the way that I do that is I'm going to factor out a 4. I'm going to factor out a value of 4 because I want that x to have a coefficient of 1. That's what's here in standard form. So I have y plus 4 squared is equal to, I'm going to factor out 4, so I'm left with x plus 10. Now you can see that these are going to be written in the same format, So since my y is being squared, my x is linear, then I know that it's going to be something that's going to open left and right. Since this is positive, since it's a positive 4, I know it's going to open to the right. If this was a negative 4, it would open to the left towards the negative number. So this is kind of a review of our parabolas. So if I want to look at the graph, remember I always go back to the graphs and sketching it. So we're going to be, this is my k value, this is my h. So my vertex of a parabola is going to be hk. So in this case, my vertex is going to be negative 10, negative 4, right? Negative 10, negative 4. So I'm here at -10, -4 is going to be my vertex, but it wants my focus. It wants my focus. I know again that it's going to open to the right. So I know my focus has to be somewhere inside my parabola. Well, in order to find that focus, we count that distance as P. It's P away from my vertex to get my focus. It's P away from my vertex to get the directrix. So I need to figure out what is P. So I know 4P is that value that's out in front. So 4P has to equal 4, right? 4P is equal to 4. If I want to solve for P, divide both sides by 4, then this tells me that P is equal to 1. It simplifies to just the value of 1. So I'm going to count 1 this way. So if I go 1 this way, if I'm at -10 and I add 1 to it, that puts me at -9. So my focus here is going to be at -9, and I'm still going to be at -4 for my Y value. So my answer is this piece right here. My directrix would be 1 this way. So I would go 1 in the negative direction. So my directrix would be here at X is equal, this is -11. So at X is equal to -11 would be my directrix. So remember that in this case, it's P distance. It's P distance away. So good little review. So this is how to put it in standard form. Remember, when you have a parabola, you're only completing the square for one piece. You won't have 2 squared terms. If you guys have any questions as you go through the quiz, please feel free to reach out to me. I will be here if you need anything. Otherwise, you guys have a fabulous day. You're welcome. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.